Picture this: an ordinary man, an ordinary day, a routine trip to buy rat poison. But what started as a faint itch in his gut spiraled into a nightmare that made him question his own body. Something is moving inside him. Something alive, something alien, something whispering his name in the dark. Could a simple box of poison trigger such horror? Or is it something far darker, tied to his buried past? Read on to discover how one night changed everything, and why you'll never look at your reflection the same way again. In the fading light of Elmwood, Illinois, a small town where cornfields bled into cracked sidewalks and the air carried the faint hum of freight trains, Harold Thompson lived a life of quiet routine. At 57, Harold was a man who seemed to belong to the background. Tall but stooped from years as a factory mechanic, his salt and pepper hair cropped close, his face carved with lines from squinting at engine parts under dim garage lights. His days followed a predictable rhythm. Dawn coffee brewed in a chipped mug, skimming the local paper for obituaries, a habit born after losing his wife, Margaret, to cancer 5 years prior, then heading to his part-time job at the auto shop. Evenings were spent tinkering in his garage, fixing things that didn't need fixing, avoiding the hollow spaces where Margaret's presence once warmed their modest ranch-style home. Beneath this ordinariness, Harold carried a weight of guilt and regret. His son, David, 32 and living in Chicago, had been estranged since a bitter argument before Margaret's diagnosis. David had wanted to pursue art school, a dream Harold scoffed at, calling it a waste of time for a working-class family. "You're throwing away a steady life," Harold had shouted, his voice echoing in their old kitchen. David's retort, that Harold's rigid expectations had choked his spirit, still stung. They hadn't spoken in years, save for curt holiday cards that felt more like obligations than olive branches. Harold told himself David would come around, but the silence gnawed at him, a dull ache like indigestion after too much diner food. He buried it under layers of denial, focusing on the tangible: oil changes, spark plugs, the creak of his tools. On a muggy September afternoon in 2025, Harold trudged into Elmwood's hardware store, the air thick with sawdust and the chemical tang of fertilizer. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting shadows that seemed to linger too long on the shelves, twisting like fingers in the corner of his eye. He was there for mouse poison. Rodents had invaded his garage again, chewing through cardboard boxes filled with Margaret's old scarves and photo albums. "Damn pests," he muttered to the clerk, Sarah, a young woman with a nose ring and a bored expression. She rang up a box of rat bait, small, green pellets that smelled faintly of bleach and damp earth. Harold paid in cash, tucking the box into his coat pocket, and headed home, the sky outside heavy with the threat of rain. That evening, in the dim light of his garage, Harold scattered the pellets along the baseboards. The space smelled of oil and old wood, with a faint mustiness from the cardboard boxes stacked in the corner. A few pellets spilled onto the concrete floor, and he swept them up with his hand, not noticing one that clung to his boot. Later, as he sat in his recliner eating a microwave dinner, Salisbury steak that tasted more like cardboard than beef, a sharp twinge pinched his gut, like a muscle cramp after hauling something heavy. He rubbed his abdomen through his flannel shirt, dismissing it as age or maybe the greasy meal. The living room felt stuffier than usual, the air thick with the scent of old carpets and a faint mildew wafting from the basement. Outside, the streetlights buzzed, their hum louder than normal, almost like a low whisper that set his teeth on edge. His daughter-in-law, Lisa, called that night, her voice a lifeline to a world he felt slipping away. "How's it going, Harold? David says hi." Her tone was warm but careful, navigating the unspoken rift between father and son. Harold grunted. "Fine, just the usual. Tell him hello back." They talked about the weather, humid, oppressive, but Lisa paused. "You sound off. You okay?" Harold forced a chuckle. "Just tired. Long day at the shop." But as he hung up, the twinge returned, deeper now, like something shifting in his bowels. He pressed his hand to his stomach, feeling the skin taut and warm, almost pulsing. Probably gas, he thought, or maybe he'd eaten something off. Sleep didn't come easily. The house creaked in the wind, a sound he'd grown used to, but tonight it felt layered with something else, a faint rustling, like paper crumpling inside the walls. Or inside him. Harold sat up, heart thudding, and pressed his palm to his abdomen again. There it was, a subtle flutter, as if a small creature stirred deep within. "Indigestion," he whispered to the empty room, but the air carried an odd metallic scent, like rusted pipes or old coins. He lay back, staring at the ceiling fan's lazy spin, its shadows twisting like tendrils across the walls. Dreams, when they came, were fragmented. Margaret's pale face in the hospital, her hand cold in his, and mice, hundreds of them, scrambling over her bed, their tiny claws scratching. Morning brought no relief. The flutter in his gut had grown to a persistent itch, like threads pulling tight inside him. He ignored it, heading to the auto shop where the clang of tools and the sharp smell of oil offered distraction. His co-worker, Mike, a burly man in his 40s with a perpetual grease stain on his forehead, clapped him on the shoulder. "You look like you wrestled a bear, old-timer." "Rough night." Harold forced a grin. "Just the mice keeping me up." But as he bent over an engine, the itch turned to a gnawing pressure, and a faint, acrid odor wafted from his skin, like the chemical bite of the rat poison. Mike wrinkled his nose. "What's that smell?" "You spill something." Harold shrugged, blaming a new soap, but anxiety coiled tighter in his chest. By evening, the sensation had evolved. Sitting in his recliner, the TV droning with a rerun of a fishing show, Harold felt a distinct movement, a squirm, like something alive tumbling through his intestines. He bolted upright, hand clutching his belly, where the skin felt unnaturally warm and pulsed faintly under his fingers. The room's shadows thickened, the TV's glow flickering like a dying bulb. His breath caught as he lifted his shirt, half expecting to see nothing but his sagging, pale flesh. Instead, just below his navel, a small, hard lump pressed against the skin, shifting slightly as if testing its confines. And then, from within, came a faint scratching, like tiny claws on bone, echoing in the quiet house. Harold Thompson clung to his routine like a drowning man to a life raft, hoping the familiar clatter of the auto shop and the bitter tang of his morning coffee would drown out the growing unease in his body. The flutter in his gut, which he dismissed as indigestion a week ago, had morphed into a persistent itch that radiated through his abdomen, chest, and back, like invisible roots threading beneath his skin. It wasn't just discomfort now, it felt alive, a restless churning that kept him awake at night, staring at the ceiling fan's hypnotic spin in his Elmwood, Illinois home. The house, once a sanctuary he and Margaret had filled with small joys, now felt claustrophobic, its air heavy with a musty scent of old carpets and a sharper, chemical odor that seemed to follow him everywhere. At the shop, Harold buried himself in work, tightening bolts and changing oil with mechanical precision. The garage smelled of grease and exhaust, but even that couldn't mask the strange stench clinging to him, a mix of burnt plastic and damp fur, like something rotting in a forgotten corner. His co-worker, Mike, noticed it first, his nose wrinkling as he leaned over an engine beside Harold. "Man, you smell like you've been rolling in chemicals." "What's that about?" Harold forced a laugh, muttering about a new detergent, but his hands trembled as he gripped a wrench. He'd started wearing long sleeves, even in the muggy September heat, to hide the subtle swelling in his abdomen. The skin there felt tender, stretched tight, as if something pressed outward, testing its limits. Mornings brought nausea, a sour taste coating his tongue like spoiled milk laced with metal. Coffee, once his ritual comfort, now tasted like he'd licked a battery. He skipped breakfast, unable to stomach food that carried an undercurrent of rot. At home, the house seemed to conspire against him. The basement, where he'd stored the leftover rat poison, reeked of earth and decay, as if the dead mice were festering below. He remembered the spilled pellets in the garage, the ones he'd swept up carelessly. Had he touched them? Ingested some by mistake? The thought gnawed at him, but rat poison caused vomiting or cramps. Not this. Not the sensation of something squirming inside, coiling around his organs like a nest of snakes. Social threads frayed. Lisa, his daughter-in-law, called again, her voice laced with concern. "David's worried, Harold. You sounded off last time. Can we come by this weekend?" The mention of his estranged son sent a pang of guilt through him, sharp as the itch in his gut. "No need," he said gruffly. "Just a bug. I'm fine." But after hanging up, he doubled over, the squirming intensifying into a writhing that made his skin crawl. He pressed a hand to his belly, feeling irregular lumps shift beneath, soft yet firm, like pebbles tumbling in a sack. Shame kept him silent. He couldn't face Lisa or David like this, a broken man with something wrong inside him. What would they think? That he was losing it, imagining things to fill the void Margaret left? The town itself felt off-kilter. Elmwood's quiet streets, usually comforting in their sameness, took on an eerie edge. The park near his house, where he'd once walked with Margaret, now seemed hostile, the trees rustling without wind, their branches casting shadows that twisted unnaturally. A stray dog stared at him from the sidewalk, its eyes glinting with an almost human intensity before it slunk away. At the diner, Betty, the waitress who'd known him for decades, squinted as she poured his coffee. "Harold, you're pale as a ghost. And what's that smell? Like you spilled gas on yourself." He lied about a chemical spill at work, but her gaze lingered on his trembling hands, the way he avoided meeting her eyes. Harold withdrew further, avoiding mirrors and keeping lights low to hide from himself. But the changes were undeniable. His abdomen swelled slightly, the skin mottled with faint bruises that appeared overnight. The chemical odor grew stronger, seeping from his pores, making his clothes reek even after washing. He tried scrubbing his skin raw in the shower, but the water seemed to carry the same metallic tang, as if the pipes themselves were tainted. At night, the house's creaks blended with a new sound, a faint scratching, like tiny claws skittering inside walls. Or inside him. The thought made his heart race, but he pushed it down. It was stress, he told himself. Grief. Guilt over David. Anything but what it felt like, something alive, burrowing through his flesh. One evening, alone in his kitchen, Harold tried to eat a bowl of soup, hoping to settle his stomach. Halfway through, a sharp pain lanced through him, like a needle piercing his gut. He stumbled to the bathroom, heaving over the sink, but nothing came up except a thin, grayish mucus that clung to the porcelain like oil. It smelled rancid, like the poison pellets mixed with decay, and it left a burning sensation on his lips. He wiped his mouth, hands shaking, and avoided the mirror above the sink. But curiosity, or dread, won out. He glanced up, and his breath caught. His reflection showed a man hollowed out, eyes sunken, skin sallow, veins standing out like blue worms under his flesh. And then, as he stared, his abdomen seemed to ripple, a subtle wave of movement independent of his breathing, as if something inside was rearranging itself. Panic surged, but shame held him back from seeking help. Elmwood's clinic was understaffed, the kind of place where you waited hours for a dismissive diagnosis. And what would he say? "I feel something moving inside me?" They'd think he was crazy, tie it to his loneliness or age. Societal expectations weighed heavy. Men like Harold didn't admit weakness, didn't ask for help. He was supposed to tough it out, like he had when Margaret was dying, when he hid her pain from David to protect him, only driving his son further away. The guilt felt like a second affliction, festering alongside whatever was happening in his body. That night, as he lay in bed, the sensations peaked. The squirming was constant now, a chorus of tiny movements that made his skin feel foreign, like a suit that no longer fit. He pressed his hand to his abdomen, feeling the lumps shift, and the scratching sound grew louder, distinct, rhythmic, like a nest of creatures stirring. The air in the bedroom was thick, the metallic scent overwhelming, and the shadows cast by the streetlights seemed to writhe on the walls, mimicking the motion inside him. Harold's breath hitched as he lifted his shirt, revealing a small, raised bulge just below his ribcage. It pulsed faintly, and then, to his horror, it stretched outward, as if something beneath was pressing back, testing the boundaries of his flesh with deliberate, alien intent. Harold Thompson's world had shrunk to the confines of his Elmwood home, each day a battle against the alien presence colonizing his body. The squirming in his gut, once a fleeting itch, had become a relentless churn, a writhing that pulsed through his abdomen, chest, and spine, as if tiny creatures burrowed through his flesh with purpose. The sensation kept him awake, his nights a blur of sweat-soaked sheets and the ceaseless hum of the streetlights outside, now laced with a faint, insect-like buzz that seemed to echo the movements inside him. His skin, once weathered but familiar, felt foreign, stretched taut over lumps that shifted beneath like stones in a restless stream. The chemical odor that clung to him, burnt plastic and rotting fur, had intensified, seeping from his pores and tainting everything. His clothes, his furniture, the very air of the house. The house itself had turned hostile. The living room, with its faded floral curtains and Margaret's old recliner, felt claustrophobic, the walls seeming to pulse faintly in time with his heartbeat. The basement, where the rat poison was stored, reeked of decay so potent Harold gagged when he opened the door. Dead mice littered the concrete floor, their bodies shriveled, but some looked oddly mangled, as if chewed from within. The air carried a metallic tang, like blood or rusted iron, that mirrored the sour taste coating his tongue. Lights flickered without reason, casting shadows that twisted into shapes, claws, tails, eyes, that vanished when he looked too long. The creaks of the old house blended with a new sound, a low, rhythmic scratching, like tiny nails scraping bone, emanating from his own body. Desperate, Harold dragged himself to Elmwood's clinic, a squat brick building where the waiting room smelled of disinfectant barely masking mold. The fluorescent lights buzzed, flickering in sync with the pulsing in his gut. Dr. Ellis, a tired man in his 60s with thinning hair and a dismissive air, poked at Harold's swollen abdomen. Probably irritable bowel syndrome. Or gas. You been stressed? Eating bad? Harold tried to explain the movements, the writhing, the lumps, but the doctor cut him off. Stress can make you feel all sorts of things. Take some antacids, cut back on coffee. No scans, no blood work. The clinic's outdated equipment and overworked staff meant anything beyond a cursory exam was a luxury. Harold left with a bottle of chalky pills and a sinking dread. In towns like Elmwood, healthcare was a patchwork, and men like him, aging, working-class, stoic, were expected to endure, not complain. Back home, Harold tried everything. Antacids, ginger tea, warm compresses. Nothing worked. The pain had escalated, sharp stabs like teeth gnawing at his insides, radiating from his core to his limbs. His abdomen was distended now, the skin translucent in spots, revealing shadowy forms beneath, elongated, wriggling shapes that pulsed with his heartbeat. Fissures appeared, small splits in the skin that oozed a yellowish fluid, sticky and burning, with a rancid stench of the poison pellets mixed with rotting flesh. He wrapped them in gauze, but the bandages grew damp, the writhing pushing against them like fingers probing for escape. Eating became impossible. Food tasted of decay, and each bite triggered waves of nausea, sometimes bringing up more of that grayish mucus that clung to his sink like a living thing. His dreams turned surreal, amplifying his dread. In one, he stood in a field of corn, the stalks rustling with tiny, scurrying shapes. Margaret appeared, her cancer-ravaged body translucent, revealing a nest of writhing creatures inside her. "You did this," she whispered, her voice a chorus of squeaks. "You drove David away, and now it's inside you." Harold woke gasping, the guilt over his son a physical weight, as if his regrets had birthed the things inside him. Was this punishment? For the poison, for his failures as a father, for hiding Margaret's pain from David to protect him, only to widen their rift? The affliction felt like a manifestation of his buried shame, a secret festering in his flesh. Isolation consumed him. Mike called, his voice gruff with worry. "Harold, you've been out a week. What's going on? You sick?" Harold lied about a flu, his voice hoarse, and hung up before the tears came. Lisa texted, "David wants to talk. Please, let us help." But he couldn't face them, not with his body betraying him. He avoided the diner, the shop, the park, anywhere eyes might linger on his pallor, his trembling hands, the faint bulges moving under his shirt. The town itself seemed complicit in his torment. The park's trees whispered without wind, their shadows coiling like tendrils. A bird perched on his fence stared too long, its eyes glinting like polished obsidian, as if it knew what lurked inside him. One night, the pain reached a crescendo. Harold collapsed on his bathroom floor, clutching his abdomen as the writhing became unbearable, a frenzy of movement that made his skin ripple visibly. The fissures widened, the oozing fluid now streaked with dark flecks, like tiny hairs or claws suspended in the muck. He staggered to the mirror, forcing himself to look. His torso was a nightmare. Bulges shifted like living tumors, veins pulsing blue-black under translucent skin. A larger fissure near his navel split further, and from it emerged a thin, pinkish tendril, fleshy, segmented, twitching like a worm seeking air. It retreated as he screamed, but not before a faint chittering echoed from within, a chorus of tiny, squeaking voices, sharp and insistent, whispering his name in a language that wasn't human. Harold Thompson had become a prisoner in his own home, the walls of his Elmwood, Illinois, house closing in like a coffin. The affliction within him had reached a grotesque peak, transforming his body into something unrecognizable, a vessel for horrors he couldn't comprehend. The squirming that once felt like a flutter had become a violent tumult, a swarm of movement that rippled through his abdomen, chest, arms, and legs. His skin, stretched to the point of tearing, was a patchwork of bruises and fissures, each oozing a thick yellowish fluid that burned like acid and reeked of decay and chemicals, a stench that filled the house, seeping into the faded wallpaper and Margaret's old curtains. The lumps beneath his flesh were no longer subtle. They bulged visibly, shifting with a life of their own, as if his body were a nest for creatures that writhed and clawed at their confines. He hadn't left the house in days, maybe weeks. Time blurred in the haze of pain and dread. The auto shop, the diner, the park, all were distant memories, replaced by the oppressive reality of his living room, where the air was thick with the metallic tang of rust and rot. The lights flickered constantly now, casting shadows that danced like living things, mimicking the movements inside him. The basement door stayed shut. The smell of dead mice and something worse, something alive, kept him from venturing down. The house's creaks had merged with the sounds from within his body. A relentless scratching, a chittering that grew louder each night, like a chorus of tiny voices plotting in the dark. Harold's attempts to fight back were futile. In a moment of desperation, he stumbled to the kitchen, hands shaking as he grabbed a pair of rusty scissors. He tore off his shirt, revealing a torso that no longer looked human. The skin was translucent in patches, revealing writhing, worm-like forms beneath, some with hints of fur or tiny glinting claws. A large fissure near his ribcage pulsed, and he drove the scissors into it, hoping to cut out the source of his torment. Blood welled, dark and viscous, but the wound reacted. Threads of pale, fleshy tendrils lashed out, whipping like antennae, stitching the cut closed with unnatural speed. The pain was blinding, a fire that seared through his nerves, accompanied by a cacophony of squeaks and scratches that seemed to mock his effort. The scissors clattered to the floor, and Harold collapsed, sobbing, as the tendrils retreated, leaving a puckered scar that pulsed with heat. The odor was unbearable now, a miasma of putrefaction and poison that made his eyes water and his throat burn. It wasn't just coming from him, it was the house, the air, the world outside. The rain that fell beyond his windows looked wrong, pooling on the sill in viscous, inky puddles that seemed to shimmer with faint movement. The neighborhood felt alien. The park across the street was silent, no birds or dogs, just the rustling of trees that sounded like whispers. Harold avoided mirrors, but glimpses caught in the glass of a picture frame showed a stranger. Eyes sunken into dark hollows, skin mottled with blue-black veins, and bulges that shifted under his flesh like rats under a blanket. His mind teetered on the edge of madness. The chittering voices grew clearer, not just calling his name but weaving fragments of memories. Margaret's voice, David's accusations, his own failures. "You let her die alone," they hissed. "You pushed him away." Was this his guilt made flesh, a punishment for the secrets he'd buried? He'd hidden Margaret's worsening condition from David, thinking it would spare his son pain, but it had only driven a wedge between them. The poison pellets haunted him too. Had they triggered this? Or was it something older, darker, tied to the land, to Elmwood's forgotten corners where the soil smelled of iron and decay? The line between reality and nightmare blurred. In his dreams, he saw fields of writhing flesh, mice with human eyes, and Margaret's body splitting open to release a swarm that burrowed into him. Isolation was complete. He ignored Mike's calls, Lisa's texts, the knocks from neighbors who'd noticed his absence. "Harold, you in there?" A voice called through the door, Betty from the diner, her tone worried. He didn't answer, couldn't face the questions, the pity, the judgment. Societal expectations pressed down. Men like him didn't break, didn't admit to fear. But he wasn't a man anymore. He was a host, a thing carrying things. The guilt over David festered, a second affliction. He wanted to call, to confess, to beg forgiveness, but the words caught in his throat, drowned by the chittering within. One night, the horror reached its peak. Harold sat in the dark, the power flickering as a storm raged outside. The rain sounded like claws tapping the roof, and the air was heavy with the stench of his own decay. His body convulsed, the writhing so intense it felt like his organs were being rearranged. He staggered to the bathroom, clutching the sink, and forced himself to look in the mirror. His reflection was monstrous. His abdomen was a mass of bulging, shifting forms, the fissures gaping wide, revealing nests of pale, segmented creatures, part worm, part rodent, with tiny, glinting eyes that stared back. One tendril, thicker than the others, emerged from a wound, curling upward like a searching finger. And then it spoke, not in his ears but in his mind, a squeaking, layered voice that said, "We are you, Harold. We are your truth." He screamed, collapsing, as the tendril pulsed and the mirror seemed to ripple, showing not his face but a writhing mass of fur and claws where his reflection should have been. Harold Thompson's world had become a nightmare of flesh and shadow, but a flicker of hope pierced the dread when he stumbled upon a potential lifeline. After the horrific night in the bathroom, where his reflection revealed a monstrous swarm within, Harold's despair pushed him past shame. He couldn't go on like this, his body a writhing prison, his mind fraying under the chittering voices that echoed his guilt. The creatures inside him, those pale, segmented things with glinting eyes, seemed to grow bolder, their movements more deliberate, as if they sensed his weakening resolve. The air in his Elmwood, Illinois, home was thick with their stench, rotting fur and chemical burn, and the house itself felt alive, its walls pulsing faintly, the rain outside pooling in inky, unnatural swirls. Desperate, Harold called Lisa, his voice cracking as he admitted he needed help. "Something's wrong with me," he rasped, unable to say more. Lisa and David arrived the next day, their faces pale with worry as they stepped into the house, wrinkling their noses at the pervasive odor. David, lean and sharp-eyed, looked at his father with a mix of concern and lingering resentment. "Dad, you look like death. Why didn't you say something sooner?" Harold couldn't meet his son's gaze, the guilt over their estrangement twisting like the creatures in his gut. Lisa, practical and gentle, insisted on taking him to a specialist in Peoria, an hour's drive away. "Elmwood's clinic is useless," she said, her voice firm. "We're getting you real help." The Peoria hospital was a sterile contrast to Harold's decaying world. Bright lights, antiseptic air, and the hum of machinery. But even here, unease lingered. The fluorescent bulbs flickered faintly, and the air carried a subtle whiff of decay, as if Harold's affliction tainted everything. Dr. Patel, a gastroenterologist with a calm demeanor and sharp eyes, examined him. Harold, stripped to a hospital gown, felt exposed as the doctor pressed his swollen abdomen, now a landscape of bulging lumps and oozing fissures. "This is unusual," Dr. Patel said, frowning. "Could be a parasitic infection, but the presentation, it's not typical." She ordered an ultrasound and a CT scan, the machines whirring as they peered into Harold's body. The technician's face paled during the ultrasound, and she excused herself abruptly, leaving Harold staring at the ceiling, the chittering in his mind growing louder. The scans revealed masses, irregular, moving shapes that baffled the medical team. Dr. Patel proposed an exploratory surgery, warning it was risky but necessary. "We need to see what's causing this. It could be a rare infection, maybe from exposure to something toxic." Harold thought of the rat poison, the spilled pellets, but didn't mention it. Fear of judgment silenced him. The surgery was scheduled for the next day. David stayed by his side, his presence a painful reminder of their rift. "I should have been here," David muttered, his voice thick. "I didn't know you were hurting." Harold wanted to confess, about Margaret, about hiding her pain, about his failures. But the words stuck, drowned by the squirming within. The surgery was a blur of cold steel and masked faces. As the anesthesia took hold, Harold dreamed of a dark field, the soil alive with writhing forms, Margaret's voice whispering, "Let them out." He woke in recovery, groggy, his abdomen bandaged and throbbing. Dr. Patel's face was grim. "We removed a mass," she said, "but it burst during extraction. A foul, smoky fluid came out, like nothing I've seen. We sent samples for analysis, but the tissue was strange, almost fibrous, like it was moving." She hesitated, her eyes flickering with something unspoken, as if she knew more but wouldn't say. "You're stable for now, but we need to monitor you." Harold returned home, the bandages tight against his skin, the pain dulled by medication. The house felt quieter, the air less oppressive, as if the surgery had excised some of the horror. Lisa and David stayed, cleaning the musty rooms and airing out the basement, where they found more dead mice, their bodies shriveled and gnawed. "Jesus, Dad, how'd you live like this?" David asked, his voice a mix of pity and frustration. Harold managed a weak smile, feeling a flicker of connection, a chance to mend what was broken. For the first time in weeks, he ate a small meal, soup, bland but free of the taste of decay. The chittering had stopped, the writhing gone, replaced by a fragile sense of normalcy. But the hospital's sterile glow couldn't erase the unease. The surgical site, though clean, itched faintly, and a faint black mist seemed to curl from the stitches when Harold changed the bandages, dissipating like smoke. The rain outside still looked too dark, pooling unnaturally on the windowsill. Lisa noticed his unease. "You're healing, Harold. Let us help you through this." But her optimism felt brittle, undercut by the hospital's vague reports. The lab results were inconclusive, Dr. Patel said, promising follow-ups but avoiding details. Harold sensed she was holding back, perhaps out of fear or protocol, a subtle nod to the healthcare system's tendency to dismiss the unexplainable, especially for patients from places like Elmwood. He tried to re-enter the world. At the diner, Betty greeted him warmly, though her eyes lingered on his gaunt frame. "Glad you're back, Harold. You had us worried." Mike stopped by, joking about the shop's chaos without him, but his laughter faltered when he caught the faint chemical scent still clinging to Harold's skin. Harold felt alienated, a stranger in his own life. The town seemed normal again, trees rustling naturally, dogs barking, but a subtle wrongness persisted, a shadow that lingered too long, a faint hum in the air like the buzz of dying bulbs. One night, as Harold sat with David, trying to bridge years of silence, the itch returned. It was faint, almost ignorable, in a new spot, his upper arm, where the skin felt warm and slightly raised. He excused himself, heart pounding, and checked in the bathroom mirror. The surgical scars were healing, but on his arm, a small, hard lump pulsed faintly, and in the dim light, a shadow seemed to writhe beneath the skin, like a memory of the creatures that had once consumed him. As he stared, a faint chittering echoed in his mind, distant but unmistakable, whispering his name once more. Harold Thompson stood at the edge of his new reality, a fragile piece stitched together by the presence of his son, David, and daughter-in-law, Lisa, in his Elmwood, Illinois, home. The surgery in Peoria had carved out the worst of the horror, the writhing, chittering masses that had turned his body into a living nightmare. But the scars, both physical and emotional, remained. His abdomen, now crisscrossed with puckered lines, felt tender, as if the skin remembered the creatures that had nested within. The house, once a suffocating prison of decay and shadows, was quieter now, its air lighter after Lisa's relentless cleaning and airing out. The basement, with its pile of shriveled mouse corpses, was sealed off, the door locked as if to trap the past. Yet, the world outside still carried an eerie undertone. The rain, though less viscous, shimmered faintly with an unnatural sheen, and the park across the street rustled with a sound too much like whispers. Harold tried to reclaim his life. He returned to the auto shop, where Mike greeted him with a hearty slap on the back, though his eyes lingered on Harold's gaunt frame and the faint chemical scent that never fully faded. "Good to have you back, old-timer. Thought you were a goner." Harold forced a smile, tightening bolts with hands that still trembled slightly. At the diner, Betty poured his coffee with a warm grin, but her gaze flickered to the scars peeking from his collar, a silent question she didn't ask. The town of Elmwood felt almost normal. Dogs barked, kids played in the park, but a subtle wrongness persisted, a shadow that moved too slowly, a faint hum in the air like a dying bulb, a metallic tang that lingered in the breeze. David and Lisa stayed for a week, their presence a balm to Harold's fractured spirit. Over dinners of simple meals, soup, bread, nothing heavy, Harold began to open up. He confessed to David about Margaret's final months, how he'd hidden her pain to shield his son, only to drive him away. "I thought I was protecting you," he said, voice breaking. "I was wrong." David's eyes glistened, his resentment softening. "I wish you'd told me, Dad. I could have been there." The words were a step toward healing, a bridge over years of silence, but the guilt in Harold's heart remained, a weight as real as the lumps that had once pulsed beneath his skin. Lisa, ever practical, pushed for follow-up appointments, but the hospital's vague reports, "inconclusive results," Dr. Patel had said, her eyes evasive, left Harold uneasy. The healthcare system's dismissal of the unexplainable, especially for small-town folks like him, felt like a betrayal, a reminder of how easily the powerless were overlooked. The physical changes lingered, subtle but undeniable. The surgical scars, though fading, itched faintly, and the lump on his arm, noticed that night with David, had grown slightly, a hard knot that pulsed when he pressed it. He hid it under long sleeves, telling himself it was nothing, a scar, a bruise, a trick of the mind. But at night, alone in his bedroom, the chittering returned, faint and distant, like an echo from a dream. It wasn't constant, not like before, but it was there, a whisper in his mind, calling his name, stirring memories of Margaret's voice, of David's accusations, of the poison pellets scattered in the garage. Was it over? Had the surgery truly excised the horror, or had it merely driven it deeper, into some hidden recess of his body or soul? Harold found moments of peace. He walked the park with David one evening, the air cool and the trees still, their branches no longer whispering. They talked about small things, David's art, the shop, the Cubs' latest season, and for the first time in years, Harold felt like a father again. Yet, the normalcy was fragile. The rain, when it fell, carried a faint iron scent, and the streetlights buzzed with that same insect-like hum. In his dreams, the field returned, its soil alive with writhing shapes, but now Margaret stood beside him, silent, her hand warm in his. "You can't outrun it," she said once, her voice soft but heavy with truth. Was it his guilt, his grief, or something more? A force tied to the poison, to Elmwood's forgotten corners, to the secrets he'd buried? He resumed his routine, but mirrors remained his enemy. He avoided them, fearing what he might see, a reflection not his own, a mass of fur and claws where his face should be. The lump on his arm grew slowly, and new ones appeared, faint and fleeting, on his thigh, his back. They didn't writhe, not yet, but their presence was a reminder. The horror might return, or perhaps it had never left. Harold accepted this ambiguity, choosing to live in the moment, to cherish the tentative reconciliation with David. He wrote a letter one night, words he couldn't say aloud, apologizing for the years lost, for the pain he'd caused. He didn't send it, but kept it in a drawer, a small act of hope. One evening, as Harold sat in his recliner, the house quiet save for the hum of the streetlights, he felt a faint itch on his arm. He ignored it, focusing on the TV's soft glow, but the sensation grew, a subtle pulse, a faint scratching like claws on bone. He lifted his sleeve, heart pounding, and saw the lump, now larger, its surface rippling slightly, as if something stirred beneath. Outside, the rain fell heavier, its droplets too dark, too thick, pooling on the windowsill like blood. The chittering returned, a single, clear whisper. "Harold!" He closed his eyes, breathing deeply, and chose not to look in the mirror. Whatever was inside him, guilt, poison, or something older, would have to wait. For now, he was alive, tethered to his son, to the possibility of redemption. What shadows do you carry in your own skin? What burdens writhe beneath the surface, waiting to be acknowledged? Share this story with someone who needs to face their own hidden truths.